Okay, so now we're going to solve question 21. This is from SAT number 10 reading. And 21, this is the first question that's after the text. And the question says, the main purpose of the passage is to something. So it's the first question that comes after the text. And not only that, but it's also talking about the main purpose of the passage. So this is what we'll call like a big picture question. It's more of a summary question. And all this means for us is that instead of focusing so much on specific text, which is usually what we want to do for other questions, we also want to focus on sort of the general trend of the passage. So these are the questions that require us to have a more comprehensive general understanding of the entire text, which is one of the reasons why I suggest that we do these after answering the other questions, because by that time we already have a more established sense of what's going on in the passage. If, for example, we didn't get a chance to read it too carefully the first time we did it. With that being said, you can still answer this right off the bat, but it just requires a little bit more work and just making sure that you actually understand what the passage is about. So first thing, I wasn't able to put the whole passage here. So if you have it, I think this is the third text in the passage, starting with, question 21. You can kind of follow along that way. So the first thing you want to do is sort of establish what's the main idea, what's the general idea of what's going on in this passage. So I do that by just doing kind of like a rough outline in my head of the major points in it. So we notice the first paragraph starts by talking about recent findings in 2014, and then it goes and talks about how this result not only tells us about exoplanets, but about a new method of calculation. It continues by then describing this new technique called TTV and sort of what it does. Then it goes into describing the technique as the brainchild, right? So the origin of the technique. Then in line 35, it says Holman and his colleagues published the idea, but it took some time for it to catch on. So this is more of the history and development of the idea. In 45, it says the technique finally became practical because of the data. And then the remaining paragraphs, the last two paragraphs, I think it's 7, 8, and 9, what they talk about is basically two separate uses, two studies that use TTV. So that's the general understanding of what's going on in the passage. The second thing that we can do to sort of bolster that general sense, or let's say that we didn't really get a good chance to read it, but we want to answer this choice right off the bat. What we do is we look for what I call high density information placement. So these are sentences in the passage that tell us most directly, most clearly what the heck it's about. And there's usually a couple typical places we can go to look at this. But so let's see. So first place is in this blurb at the top, and usually it's the title, right? Star-crossing planets, literally Strut their stuff. And this question is for this text, this actually doesn't help us too much, doesn't tell us too much that's interesting. So then we can move on to sort of the second spot, which is going to be the introductory paragraph. SAT is really good at following. You remember like the 5-paragraph essay model where they start with thesis, 3-body paragraphs, conclusions, and your introductory paragraph tells you what your thesis is. SAT sort of follows that same pattern, meaning that normally in the introduction paragraph, you're going to get something like a thesis, some sort of mention of what's going on. So we have to track the way that this is set up. It starts by talking about exoplanet hunters in January, finding this tribe of mini Neptunes, etc. It says results, and then it says they highlighted more than just the diversity of exoplanets, meaning that almost like there's something more important than just this diversity. And that diversity, or the thing that's more important, is that it also shows the power of an up-and-coming method of calculating the masses of alien worlds. And here, what we want to do is sort of focus on the conclusion or the beginning, the opening sentence for each of the paragraphs that follows. What I did here is I just took a snapshot of the opening paragraphs, opening sentences of some of the following paragraphs. So it starts this one by the new technique. Then again, the technique. And they published the idea referring to the technique, and then the technique became practical. So what we start to see is that the introduction paragraph sets up the fact of this finding. More importantly, also shows the power of an up-and-coming method of calculating the masses of alien worlds. The new technique, the idea, the technique. So based on our general understanding of the passage, as well as these specific points in the text, I kind of conclude that this whole thing is about this specific technique called TTV. And so we should expect our answer choice to relate to that. So going back, we can start to eliminate and sort of select our answer choice. So A says, discuss the use of a new astronomical technique. This matches pretty much what we just said, so we should definitely keep this one. B says, provide preliminary data about certain planets. The only plausible way we could say this is true is maybe this part up here, right? This opening paragraph about preliminary data about new planets. Later in the two experiments that are mentioned, it does talk about data about certain planets. The problem with this is that it's just not doesn't best capture the focus. The majority of the focus is always on this technique, and even the preliminary data, even the data that is talked about planets later on in the last three paragraphs, is almost used as an example of how TTB is being used. Right? This is not going to be a good answer choice. We can eliminate it. So he says, argue in favor of a controversial experiment. Controversial experiment is a loud claim, and what I mean by that is a bold claim, a strong claim, which means if it were in the text, we would notice it. The text would make clear that this is about a controversial experiment. It's kind of rare that an SAT test will be about a controversial experiment, just sort of a general and avoid controversy. But because there's nothing mentioned about a controversial experiment, we can get rid of it. And then D says, suggest an innovative alternative to an established scientific procedure. This is maybe the only other plausible one because we're talking about an innovative alternative, which could be, hey, this new technique, right? Up and coming method. And so this might be an innovative alternative. The problem is, what do you do when you have to decide between this? Because this talks about a new astronomical technique, and D talks about an innovative alternative. So they're almost saying the same thing. And it's almost like A is nested inside of D. I hope that's not too confusing. But basically, A and D both say that this is a new or innovative technique, but D goes further and says more. So typically, when you're in this choice, you want to choose the simpler option, right? Because if you're choosing a more complex option, there's more things that can go wrong. That's a way to think about it. But moreover, we can look at D and say that it's just not the case that um, there's this dynamic between the text is setting up this old established scientific procedure, and then it's presenting this new innovative alternative. It does mention the old method of, of finding the masses, or this old, the old method of determining the masses of alien worlds. But it doesn't really harp on it. It doesn't focus on it so much as it discusses TTV in general. So because A is a simpler option than D, and D has this part here, which could make it wrong, we're going to eliminate D and leave A as our answer choice.